Good evening. I'm at St Thomas Church in Kilnhurst this evening. It's a lovely sunny evening. I realise that it's almost 20 years ago when myself and Giles Brealey from Swinton Heritage produced this video. It's a churchyard tour of the grounds of St Thomas Church. Primarily we did this as a fundraiser for the church. So almost 20 years ago, time does fly. Then in 2009, we were engaged to produce this little booklet. This was to celebrate 150 years of the church here in Kilnhurst. So 2009, 150 year anniversary. The little booklet tells the story of the church, the different incumbents and other things that affected the village through the passage of that time. We can have a look at an old map, a very old map of Kilnhurst now. And this is a map of Kilnhurst before the church was even built. If we can see here, we've got the Highthorn Road now. It was then called Birdwell Road, going away towards Meadowview. Birdwell Flats is noted there. Glebe Farm is now completely disappeared, but this road here is now what we call Wentworth Road, which leads away up to Piccadilly. Interestingly, we see the National School, as it was then called, later become St Thomas School, and on this piece of land here, then called Sparrow Cliff Field, this was where the church was to be built. Now, interesting to note down here, this was the main area of the village. There's Kilnhurst Forge with quite a cluster of properties around there. And we can see the Ship Inn marked, the pub, the Ship Inn. Now, before the church was built, church services were actually held in the pub. That was the place of worship before the church was built here on this piece of land here at the junction of Highthorn Road and Wentworth Road. Sparrow Cliff Field it was called then. So we know this map was dated sometime between 1836 and 1859. In 1836, the 5th Earl Fitzwilliam endowed the school for Kilnhurst children. After that time, in 1851, the first curate was appointed to look after the village. He was appointed by the Vicar of Swinton, and that was a real step forward for Kilnhurst to become its own parish. And it was the next Earl, the 6th Earl Fitzwilliam, who in 1858 donated this piece of land for the building of St Thomas Church. He also gave £200 towards that. On Maundy Thursday 1859, the church had its first service. A very crowded event it was then. But thinking about the churchyard, there are so many interesting and unusual stories connected with the churchyard and the people who are memorialised here. We have captains of industry, victims of industry. Just over my sort of right shoulder is the grave of a man who was killed in the Warren Vale colliery disaster. With leading trade unionists, with people represented by the visual arts, artists, portraiture, sculptures, connections with those, and also potters, engineers and glassmakers. In 1910, the churchyard became rather full and they had to have an extension to the churchyard, and burials took place beyond up on towards Highthorn Road there. There's one particular memorial I would like to concentrate on though this evening. So if we can just walk over in this direction. This is a very sad story. It says George and Rebecca Wright, late of Bacon Island in Sheffield, aged 34 and 29 respectively. Now, buried in this grave is Rebecca Wright, and she was a victim of the Great Sheffield Flood. That was when the Dale Dyke Dam burst, an embankment burst its banks. Coincidentally, the excavations for the Dale Dyke Dam also started in 1859. It took 5 years to build and it was destroyed in one night. So So on the 11th of March 1864, 250 lives were lost in Sheffield. 1864, over in America they were still fighting the Civil War. Why did the dam was built? Because Sheffield needed clean water. It also needed a huge amount of water for industry. Most of the mills in the Loxley Valley were fed by water, so the Dale Dyke Dam was to control the flow of that water. Increasing population made the water supply very important, and people were aware then of diseases which were carried by water, such as cholera. The Dale Dyke Dam was going to be one of 4 dams. The other one was called the Agden, the Strines, or the Dam Flask. On that terrible night in 1864, the embankment failed. It was the greatest civilian calamity in Victorian Britain, and it's the worst ever British dam disaster. It destroyed many industries, these very self-same industries that the dam was built to serve. Hundreds of homes were destroyed and thousands of people were left homeless. Pubs, paper mills, toll houses, gasworks, even the Hillsborough Barracks suffered casualties. The Wicker was left under several feet of water, and Ladies Bridge did survive but was badly shaken. So these people were residents of Bacon Island. Now I'm going to show you a photograph of the destruction of the cottages at Bacon Island. If you can make the photograph out, you can see the whole of the side of the cottages was actually ripped away. And the story of the Wright family is told in an account, because the rescuers went along, and when they came to the Wrights' cottages, there were candles still burning in the wrecked upstairs bedroom. By chance, some very brave actions took place on that terrible night, as well as the disasters, some tremendous acts of bravery. And one of those was a gentleman said, well, I'm going to just check this house. They got a plank, he put the plank up to the window, he climbed into the upstairs bedroom, and amazingly a child was still asleep in the bed. He lowered the child to the waiting arms of the other rescuers down, and they said to the child, where's your mum and dad? Where's your mama and papa? And the child said, they've been swept out of the window. And that is the story of the Wright family. So Rebecca's body was washed down here to Kilnhurst, and she was interred in this grave on the 16th of March. The husband was never found. There are also victims buried in Mexborough, and there were victims buried in Doncaster. Some, of course, were unidentified. But the memorial here tells the story of the orphan. And the poem says, weep not, little orphan, though parents are gone. Thy God is a father to the fatherless one. His promise is sure, and has he not said, leave thy children to me, and I'll provide them with bread. Though parents are gone in the deluging flood, they both had been washed in Christ's precious blood. And though from their earthly home they are riven, they may all meet again in a home in heaven. Now the people of Kilnhurst would have spent quite a lot of money on this memorial, and obviously the carving and the size of the memorial would have been quite a costly affair. But I think people were so moved by the story of the small orphan girl who lost both her parents, her mum to be washed down the River Don, here to find her final resting place in Kilnhurst, and the father never to be found. It's just one of the stories which are in St Thomas's churchyard. Thank you for listening.